This is Unit 12, Section C, and it deals with defenses to conspiracy and takes a closer look at Pennsylvania conspiracy law. Ionelli versus the U.S. is the first case we look at, and it involves Wharton's rule. Now, Wharton's rule may not even be a rule, but it's been called that for a long time. And it says this: if two people are required for the crime, conspiracy merges into the crime, and only one crime can be charged. And there are just some classic examples of this. They include bigamy, incest, dueling, adultery. Any crime that requires two people to participate really doesn't lend itself to a charge of conspiracy between those two people. Now, Ionelli was charged under a federal statute that defined a gambling crime as 5 or more persons engaged in a gambling enterprise. And of course, he would want Wharton's rule to apply because this crime is defined by a number of persons. And he thinks that Wharton's rule should apply because if it did, it would deprive the prosecutor of some of the great leverage that they get under conspiracy laws. Group crime dangers is envisioned by the Organized Crime Control Act trump Wharton, or Wharton's rule, and there's no merger here, and separate crimes of conspiracy in gambling may be charged. Jabardi versus the U.S. involves the Mann Act, and the Mann Act says that a man cannot escort an unmarried woman across a state line for illicit purposes. That's what happened here. There was a charge of conspiracy between a man and a woman to violate the Mann Act. And again, you cannot be guilty of conspiracy to commit a crime that is designed to protect you. We saw that with statutory rape, statutory sexual assault, and that's the case here. In People v. Sconce, we learned that you must withdraw before an overt act is committed. If you are hoping to call off a professional hit, as was the case in this circumstance, the overt act requirement is a touch of mercy, really, designed to provide maximum locus penitentiae, or a last opportunity for the conspirators to call the whole thing off. So it's actually a good thing, a merciful thing, and as a result, it holds people to a high standard in order to be worthy of it. Once an overt act has been committed in furtherance of the conspiracy, the crime of conspiracy has been completed, and no subsequent action by the conspirator can change that. So we require early action by someone who claims a defense of withdrawal. In this case, Sconce conspired to commit murder, but the overt act occurred, and then Sconce called it off. So he avoided the murder charge, but the conspiracy charge was a completed crime from which he could not withdraw. Let's take a look at the Pennsylvania statute. Here's the heart of the conspiracy statute, and it clearly identifies Pennsylvania as a bilateral conspiracy jurisdiction. Now, you see in the definition of the conspiracy, we see words like with another person or persons, agrees with such other person or persons, agrees to aid such other person or persons. And all of these are sure signs that this is a bilateral jurisdiction. In subsection B of our conspiracy statute, we see that you don't even need to know the identity of your co-conspirators in order for them to be part of a conspiracy with you. In subsection C, we learned that if one agreement is to commit multiple crimes, there can be only one conspiracy. Subsection D talks about venue and measures that should be taken to protect the rights of a defendant when there is a joinder. Sometimes a joinder will prejudice one of the parties, so there has to be some mechanism in conspiracy charges to provide for separate trials or some other mechanism that can be used to protect the rights of the individuals. There must be an overt act in Pennsylvania, of course, but it need not be committed by the defendant. It can be anyone within the conspiracy, and something that one conspirator does not even know. It could be someone, it could be a complete stranger, but a part of the conspiracy reasonably anticipated to commit certain acts. And there is a section that allows for renunciation. Now, renunciation must thwart the success of the conspiracy. It puts a hard burden on people who wish to renounce or abandon the conspiracy. Again, a tough standard for renunciation and abandonment. Renunciation must come before an overt act, and the conspirator must break with his confederates, telling them that he is out, or telling law enforcement of their plans to commit the criminal act. Without that, abandonment is not sufficient to protect the person who thinks he's getting out, who has renounced, and the duration of the conspiracy just goes on and on. And finally, conspiracy survives the target crime. If the conspirators continue to reap the benefit of the crime, as they would in say, an insurance fraud situation, where there's an accident, and over the years, long after they had agreed to commit the acts that were necessary to affect insurance fraud, if they continue to get checks, well, that conspiracy will continue on and on. And we've seen a case like that in our materials. Now, that was statutory law. Here are some case law conclusions regarding the agreement. An unlawful agreement or an agreement to do a lawful act in an unlawful manner is an essential element of conspiracy. You can see one of the cases talks about the nexus being the agreement that makes each member criminally responsible for the acts of others. Cases have determined that the Commonwealth has the burden in these conspiracy cases. We've learned that a conspiracy may be inferentially established. We know that these aren't agreements that usually find their way to paper. We know that the essence of every criminal conspiracy is a common understanding. We know that the circumstances that we look for in Pennsylvania to support a conviction for a conspiracy are the association between the parties, the knowledge of the commission of the crime, presence at the scene is a big one, and in some situations, participation in the object of the conspiracy. We also know that common law spousal immunity theory is abandoned when we're talking about a conspiracy, so that a husband can conspire with a wife. No third party is necessary. Again, more on renunciation case law. For an abandonment of the conspiracy to be legally sufficient, it must occur before the commission of the crime becomes so imminent that avoidance is out of the question. An intent to withdraw to be effective must be communicated in ample time to allow co-conspirators to also abandon the scheme. Moreover, failure to actually participate in the activity which is the subject of the conspiracy does not in and of itself establish abandonment. So you can withdraw in your own mind. You can tell your friends you've withdrawn, but unless you tell your co-conspirators that you're out and try to thwart the criminal act that is the target of their conspiracy, and unless you go to law enforcement and reveal the criminal conspiracy if your co-conspirators refuse to renounce, you have no protection under the renunciation case law in Pennsylvania. So that's it for conspiracy. Next week we will examine accomplice liability.